One text message, one photograph, one word sent back. Beautiful. That is all Scarlett Ross gave them. Because she already knew what they did not. The war they thought they were starting had actually ended months ago, the moment she first discovered the truth and chose silence over rage. She is 41 years old. She built a disaster recovery empire from nothing. She knows better than anyone on Earth that the most dangerous phase of any crisis is not the explosion. It is the quiet, precise, methodical work that comes right after. And what Nolan and Delaney had just done by pressing send was hand her the final timestamp she needed to lock the door on them forever. What this story reminds us is something ancient and undefeated. Silence is not weakness. Preparation is not passivity. And the person who stays completely calm in the fire is almost always the one still standing when the smoke clears. If this story pulled you in and you want to know exactly how it ends, subscribe right now, hit that like button, drop a comment with just one word, the first word that came to your mind, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength today. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you stories with genuine meaning and lasting lessons.
It was a Tuesday when Scarlett Ross placed a single, leather-bound ledger on my desk, clearing my calendar for the next 7 months. This wasn't a divorce case. It was a hostile takeover. I felt a clinical admiration for the architect sitting opposite me. She laid out the facts. Her husband, Julian, was a marketing asset, never a partner. His contracts proved it. Scarlett built an empire from sheer force of will. I was being hired to defend the fortress, not the marriage. She recounted the early days, the sheer grit. Her opponent, Sabine Reed, viewed this history as a vulnerability, not a weapon. The key to the entire case sat at her desk. Tessa Mitchell, her executive assistant, my primary witness. In legal terms, Julian Croft was not a husband, but a variable, a tool deployed first by Scarlett, then by Sabine. I reviewed Sabine's efficiency plans. They were brilliant, but their endgame was sabotage, not synergy. Sabine's hiring was the beginning. Scarlett saw an asset. Julian saw an ally. I saw the inception of a conspiracy. Their alliance was documented in expense reports I reviewed. The off-site meetings were calculated moves in a boardroom war. The photograph from Maui wasn't a confession. It was service of process, a declaration of their intent to seize control. My read of the evidence was simple. Julian believed he was in charge. Sabine's smile was the cold calculus of a successful transaction. They attempted to frame Scarlett as an irrational queen for the board. It was a classic and clumsy character assassination play. Scarlett's one-word reply, stunning, wasn't emotional. It was a logic bomb that created the first fissure in their plan. My client didn't see infidelity. She saw an opponent's predictable opening move and began logging the data. When I met her that afternoon, she was reviewing financials. This war, for her, had begun long before that photograph. Their case hinged on Scarlett breaking. I've reviewed her deposition history. She doesn't break, she counters. Their affair was merely evidence of conspiracy. The hushed calls were overt acts, performed for an audience they never suspected. The text arrived at 11:43 p.m. her time, a tactical choice. Scarlett analyzed the strategy, not the insult. A chill settled between their offices. Their precision strike had failed, and they sensed the trap closing around them. They bet on a woman's reaction, not a CEO's. It was a fatal flaw in their legal and strategic reasoning. They needed her to appear volatile. She gave them absolute, unnerving silence, a ghost in their own machine. They thought the picture was the final move. For our purposes, it was the official start of litigation. She built this company in a sweltering warehouse. Survival was coded into her DNA and the corporate charter. Sentiment is a fatal bug, she'd stated in meeting minutes. She was now applying that protocol to internal threats. Her company was the last call for failing systems. She was now running a recovery operation on her own life. That level of control demanded sacrifice. By the end, there was no bandwidth left for a liability like Julian. I reviewed his background file. She was 33, brilliant, and perpetually running threat assessments. They met at a gala. A photograph showed a rare drop in her firewall. He represented an unknown risk she chose to accept. He thought he was saving the woman, never understanding she was the operating system of the entire machine. Then Sabine arrived. My client saw a necessary system upgrade. I now saw her as a Trojan horse. Sabine spoke the only language Scarlett still fully processed: absolute sterile competence. She was a perfect vector for the attack. Making Sabine COO was a calculated risk born of burnout. It became her single greatest vulnerability. She lowered her shields, trusting his warmth and Sabine's precision, a fatal oversight in her own security protocol. She gave them the kingdom. We cataloged every new level of access, every password handed over. They were weapons. I held the memo giving Sabine signature authority. They saw it as abdication. My client was setting a honeypot. She didn't just give them the key. She constructed the trap around them and waited, watching the monitors. Their encrypted chats weren't hiding an affair. They were creating a meticulous, admissible data trail for our discovery. The fraudulent Ohio expense report became Exhibit A in our fraud case. My client's casual question confirmed she knew. The secret board meetings weren't a coup. They were simply them building our case for breach of fiduciary duty. It was never about Julian. It was a silent, brutal war for control between my client and her COO. The palpable tension was the precursor to detonation. My job was to direct the blast with maximum legal force. Sabine adopted my client's ethos but forgot the most critical variable in the system: the quiet assistant who saw everything. Then came the linchpin: Sabine's order to purge the Nightingale files, Scarlett's counterorder. Tessa made a copy. We had them. They used love and trust to steal an empire, but they underestimated the one person who kept the records. That is where every conspiracy dies. Scarlett Ross presented her case not with a plea, but with a ledger. For 2 years, she had documented Julian Croft's meticulous evaluation of her, a predator assessing its prey. The entry point was a single, anomalous vendor payment he handled personally. Not a mistake, but a calculated probe, testing the system's defenses for the heist to come. Summit Strategic Group, a shell company, the recipient of a $50,000 wire transfer. Her assistant had secured the confirmation, the first piece of ordnance for our arsenal. The payment had no paper trail because he controlled the paper, a digital ghost designed to misdirect any investigation away from the real breach he was engineering. His instrument was Leo Vance from marketing, an ambitious junior who became the first unwitting pawn. The authorization for a phantom campaign was our Exhibit A in establishing a pattern of manipulation. Vance lacked the authority for such a transaction. Croft had simply co-opted the boy's digital credentials, using Scarlett's own delegated power as the weapon against her. While the board debated market strategy, I saw the evidence of Croft building a financial backdoor. True power, I've always found, resides in the details others deem insignificant. This was never about simple fraud. It was the methodical assassination of a reputation. The booking confirmation was a psychological tactic designed to shatter her composure before he moved on the company, a villa in Hawaii, for 2. The confirmation was routed to an old email, a ghost in her machine, a calculated personal cruelty that revealed his true nature. He'd scheduled the trip to clash with a mandatory conference, then feigned concern for her well-being. Each meticulously planned detail was a separate count in the indictment we were building. When Scarlett discovered it, her response wasn't tears, but a frighteningly quiet resolve. He mistook that silence for weakness. I recognized it as the calm before a declaration of war. Her first call was to me. Her voice was pure steel. I could almost hear Croft's smirk on the other end, believing his emotional gambit had succeeded perfectly. We brought in Marcus Cole, our forensic accountant. Croft had already laid a false trail for him, a sordid narrative framing an innocent man for his own crimes. For 7 months, her assistant played her part, serving coffee to a predator while feeding us intel. She was the invisible agent in a silent, high-stakes corporate war. We knew Cole's server imaging was being watched by Croft. Every file access was a piece of theater, a performance for an audience of one that only strengthened our case for premeditation. The diverted funds were a distraction. The true objective was concealed in the revised corporate bylaws he had her assistant prepare. He wasn't just robbing the house, he was stealing the deed. He was constructing a legal cage, using the junior employee's access logs as proof of a conspiracy. The digital footprints read like a confession to a crime the boy couldn't even comprehend. Leo Vance's job was graphic design. His presence in the company's financial core was a glaring absurdity. A lie so bold it could only be intentional. It was Croft's fatal overreach. Scarlett's file, labeled contingency, was my blueprint. He assumed it was defensive. He never conceived it was the prosecution's brief against him. He framed the trip as corporate espionage to his own counsel. The Hawaiian villa wasn't for an affair, it was his forward operating base for a hostile takeover, funded by his target. To Croft, this was entirely procedural. Scarlett Sterling was not a person but a variable on a project plan, an obstacle slated for removal. The affair narrative was classic misdirection. His war room was a luxury suite, paid for with her capital. The sheer audacity of it was, I admit, breathtaking. He perceived her trust as a vulnerability to be exploited. It never occurred to him that it was, in fact, an integrity test, a test he had been failing for 3 years. From her assistant's intel, 11:45 p.m., his screen showed a drafted email to the chairman, the damning Hawaii photo attached, ready to launch. 1 minute before he executed her character. I pictured his face, serene with the absolute self-assurance of a man who believes he has already won. He clicked send. The system returned a red banner, access denied. The first tremor in his carefully constructed reality, an impossible glitch in his perfect equation. He pivoted to other systems. All of them, from contracts to financials, returned the same result. His digital identity had been surgically excised from the corporate network. His delegated authority was void, erased. I can only imagine the dawning, chilling comprehension as he turned his attention to the corporate treasury. He tried the treasury portal. A new security protocol was active, mandating a physical hardware key. He did not have one. He would not be getting one. Any wire exceeding $25,000 now required Scarlett's biometric approval and a countersignature from my office. The vault had been sealed. His entire coup was dead in the water, his leverage gone. It was at this point that Scarlett's counteroffensive became exquisitely personal. A text from Leo Vance appeared on his screen. Locked out. This was no longer just strategy. This was Scarlett methodically dismantling his network piece by piece. Retribution. The corporate apartment was in Scarlett's name. His pawn's frantic texts confirmed his key card was deactivated. We had evicted his co-conspirator. In the span of 5 minutes, we had rendered Leo Vance not just unemployed, but homeless. Croft's assets were being systematically neutralized. Then came the enterprise-wide legal hold notice, which I had helped Scarlett draft at 2 that morning. A beautiful legal checkmate, using his own tactics against him. Every server was now a sealed crime scene. The digital evidence was frozen, and the narrative now belonged entirely to us. He could not delete the plan. He could not erase the conspiracy. An alert for an emergency board meeting appeared on his phone. He had been summoned to his own execution. I sent Scarlett a text. 2 words. It's done. It was the clean, final sound of a well-honed legal instrument performing its function perfectly. Simultaneously, Scarlett's email deployed to the board with Croft copied, a masterwork of corporate language, devastating in its professional politeness. Gross conflict of interest. Material fiduciary threat. She was disassembling his career using his own lexicon. She had been ahead of him the entire time. His phone began to ignite with calls from board members. In the reflection of that dying screen was the victory, the end of the invisible war. The champagne would remain unopened. There was nothing left to say. There were only lawyers now, and his profound arrogance had become his fatal liability. Every component of his meticulously crafted strategy was now an exhibit against him. He was no longer a predator, but prey, trapped in the cage he had built for her. As he looked out over the resort lights, our team was executing the final commands thousands of miles away, erasing his empire with each keystroke. He misjudged her completely. He saw the queen on the board but never bothered to look for the player moving the pieces. This was never his game to win. It was always hers. It began not with a summons, but with a black leather ledger placed on my desk. My 10 o'clock was canceled. So was the rest of my year. The enemy's opening gambit was a corporate canonization, naming Eleanor Vance an honorary founder, a gilded cage. Mr. Croft played his part beautifully. The wedding announcement was a tactical airstrike, designed for maximum psychological impact. Their narrative was clean, brutal, and effective. A steady hand replacing a founder fractured by grief. A classic boardroom coup. While Thorne rehearsed her eulogy, our own intel confirmed she was monitoring Eleanor's communications. Amateur. Eleanor was making the calls we expected, shoring up alliances. From their perspective, it looked like desperation. From ours, it was a holding action. They saw her trying to douse a forest fire with a teacup. At 3:30, their video conference began, the victory champagne just off camera. The board looked somber, funereal. Then Thorne appeared, radiating a smug, predatory confidence. And then, Eleanor Vance. She wasn't grieving. She was granite in a charcoal blazer. A cold, professional satisfaction settled in my stomach. She was ready. Thorne, blinded by arrogance, launched into the script we'd anticipated. Eleanor is facing a personal crisis, she began, dripping with false concern. Her capacity to lead is, understandably, compromised, she continued. To protect the company, a leave of absence is essential. I will assume the role of acting CEO. The silence was thick. Then Eleanor's voice, like chilled steel, "Are you quite finished?" Before Thorne could reply, our first move. "Good morning, I am Isabel Reed, personal counsel to the founder." As the chairman began to object, Reed cut him off cleanly. "Before this proceeding continues, I direct your attention to Article 4 of the bylaws. Founders' written consent. A kill switch I'd made sure was ironclad years ago. You lack the authority for this vote, Avery." The trap sprung. "She's unstable," Thorne sputtered, her composure finally cracking. A new voice entered the call. "The instability is in your accounting." A flowchart bloomed across the screen. "David Chen, independent auditor. I've uncovered irregularities originating from the COO's office." Chen was surgical, just as I'd prepped him. "Unauthorized payments to a shell company, personally expedited by Ms. Thorne." He let the silence hang before delivering the final blow. "This represents a catastrophic conflict of interest and a material breach of contract." The chairman's voice was glacial. "Ms. Thorne, are you operating a slush fund?" Her denial was a predictable, shrill shriek. "It's a setup!" Eleanor leaned into her camera. "I didn't need revenge, Avery. I just needed to do my job. You made the mistake of assuming I'd be too busy mourning." The end was swift, clinical. "Motion dismissed. The COO's access is frozen. You are suspended, effective immediately, Ms. Thorne. You will speak with no one." Her screen went dark. In the cold morning light, the brutal genius of Eleanor's strategy was finally clear. The affair was never the weapon. Croft's manufactured happiness was the bait, designed to make them overconfident, to make them show their hand. She allowed us all to see a victim, leveraging our assumptions while she methodically built their execution platform. That night, my encrypted phone buzzed. It wasn't another lawyer, it was an anonymous message from our key witness, the one ordered to burn the evidence. Tessa Mitchell, the executive assistant, the one piece of office furniture that was never supposed to think for itself. She had booked their flights and filed their fraudulent expenses. She was a function, a tool. But the tool developed a conscience. She would have been destroyed if she'd gone to Thorne. With a chilling certainty, she knew exactly who to contact. Eleanor Vance. I later saw Eleanor's reply. Not a promise of safety, just my firm's address. She had acquired an asset and delivered it to be weaponized. I remember Tessa in our conference room, the flash drive in her bag containing enough evidence for federal indictments. Her hands shook, but her memory was perfect. I listened to Eleanor's voice on speakerphone, a calm anchor in the storm, assuring her of our protection. And Tessa gave us everything, every detail. including the panicked, screaming call from Thorne ordering her to delete the servers. In her terror, Thorne gave a direct order to destroy evidence, a fatal miscalculation about the person who managed all her secrets. Tessa didn't delete a thing. She copied it all. The entire conspiracy now resided on our firm's secure server. The kill shot. Every chat log, every falsified invoice, and their own presentation, a monument to their hubris. They called it phase shift. I reviewed that file with a cold fury. The Maui trip wasn't a vacation, it was an indictment. The wedding photo was labeled psychological trigger. They believed that to neutralize Eleanor Vance, they didn't need a corporate strategy. They just needed a single photograph. She called the slush fund aggressive vendor commissions. Payments I saw Tessa had processed. They thought they were playing chess. It was just theft. The plan was a masterwork of cruelty. Thorne managed the board. Croft was tasked with the emotional demolition. Then Tessa found the audio file. Croft had sent it to Thorne, a strategic analysis of Eleanor's psychological vulnerabilities from the man who shared her bed. A perfect weapon. His words were forensic, devoid of emotion. "She won't react to the photo with anger," he'd written. "She will go still. I know her tells." "She will withdraw," he predicted. "By the time she recovers, we will have consolidated control." They mistook her trauma for tactical weakness. The CEO in her could survive a boardroom ambush. But the wife? That was the target. Playing that recording for her was my job. He had mapped her deepest vulnerabilities and handed Thorne a blueprint for her destruction. And in that quiet room, watching her listen to it, I stopped being a lawyer. I became a witness to a woman forging her pain into a blade. I watched Scarlett Ross absorb the information. Her composure was absolute. The assistant, Tessa Mitchell, was visibly shaking. My client was not. Arthur Sterling and Amelia Vance were predators who underestimated their prey. The assistant they ignored had just handed me the weapon to dismantle them. I slid the federal whistleblower agreement across my desk. It was a shield for the one asset they never accounted for in their risk assessment. "They can no longer touch you," I stated. Scarlett's voice was like ice. "Your employment with him is terminated. You now work for me." The company's most invisible employee became its linchpin. I knew then they were celebrating in Maui, oblivious to the counteroffensive. Their media campaign was predictable. By Tuesday, Sterling's podcast interview aired, a masterclass in polished, sickening falsehoods. He framed Scarlett as unstable, claiming their partnership had decayed. It was a pre-scripted narrative for a corporate assassination. He was the visionary, she, the liability. Sterling's magazine cover was a monument to well-executed defamatory public relations. The story conveniently omitted the affair and the fraud, recasting betrayal as a necessary business decision. They were saviors, not saboteurs. They branded a criminal conspiracy a corporate rescue, and the market, for a time, applauded. They had successfully seized the narrative. They expected a public fight, a volley of press releases. They cast Scarlett as the scorned founder desperate to save face. She declined the role. Her strategic silence was our first tactical victory. They were shouting at a void, not seeing their own reflection. They mistook silence for surrender. While they gave interviews, I weaponized the data from Mitchell, assembling 3 targeted legal dossiers. The first dossier went to the board. It was a timeline, not a narrative, proving the year-long affair with Vance, a fact they had perjured themselves to hide. It cross-referenced their hotel receipts with board meeting dates. This wasn't about infidelity. It was a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty. The second dossier eviscerated their financial cover story. Our forensic analyst, Ethan Cole, traced every dollar to their shell corp, Blue Harbor Consulting. It included the 6-figure wire transfer for their Maui villa. It was a perfect ledger of every asset they had misappropriated for their victory lap. Their phase shift project fund was a slush fund for theft. The third file was destined for the Department of Justice. Mitchell had mirrored the entire server. Her data included immutable server logs showing Sterling altering contracts post-suspension. It was a digital confession of evidence tampering. This escalated beyond a boardroom dispute into multiple federal crimes. The reality they had constructed was about to be systematically dismantled. Within 24 hours, the financial repercussions began. 2 school systems, holding 8-figure contracts, immediately suspended all work. An insurer froze a hospital wing's escrow account, invoking a morals clause and initiating a full audit. The capital flow ceased. The board, facing shareholder lawsuits, severed all ties with Sterling and Vance. They thought they were in a PR war, not a legal one. They believed charisma and a well-marketed lie were sufficient. The arrival of federal subpoenas clarified their gross miscalculation. She dismantled their empire not with emotion, but with the cold, irrefutable weight of evidence. A podcast is no defense against a server log. But the true depravity wasn't the embezzlement. The deepest poison was found on Sterling's laptop, a chronicle of profound personal violation. Vance had been his operative inside Scarlett's office for 18 months, a systematic betrayal of professional and personal trust. She photographed personal journals, confidential strategy memos, and stole an encrypted recorder from Scarlett's desk, a device for private reflections. 5 years of audio diaries, therapeutic recordings of her deepest professional anxieties. Vance had delivered Scarlett's psyche to her enemy. She gave Sterling every password, every vulnerability. It was the hostile takeover of a human being, and Vance was the inside agent. They psychoanalyzed her, searching for the precise leverage point to shatter her resolve. They weaponized her known trauma responses. Their strategy was flawless. A single leaked photo from Maui was meant to trigger a complete psychological collapse. Sterling had a contingency. A forged whistleblower complaint against Scarlett resided on my old drive, filled with fabricated claims of professional misconduct. The Charleston Hospital contract was their intended kill shot, a falsified bid rigging accusation, co-authored by Vance, for total character assassination. Sterling's endgame was to frame Scarlett so perfectly she would be forced to resign. They only needed one public breakdown to spring the trap. Scarlett would have lost everything. Reading their methodical plan, I felt a cold fury. It was not business. It was meticulously engineered evil. I reviewed their return flight confirmations. They were awaiting news of her public destruction, the climax to their treachery. I imagined them assuming she was broken. The affair was merely tactical, a commonplace wound they'd inflicted to create an opening. The true malice was Vance using years of friendship as a weapon, turning every shared confidence into a targeting vector for Sterling. She knew every vulnerability and guided the attack. They banked on her being destroyed by the person she trusted most. It was monstrous. But as the hours passed in their suite, the expected news never arrived. The silence from our end must have become an unnerving vacuum. The self-doubt they engineered was the linchpin of their strategy. Her silence was a deviation from their psychological profile. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. A new variable must have entered Vance's mind. How did I allow him to compromise my plan? She must have seen a stranger in the mirror. Her alliance with Sterling was a means to an end, but I doubt she calculated the cost to herself. Guilt is a poor investment. As I finalized Mitchell's affidavit, I felt a rare satisfaction. Their silence wasn't a stalemate. It was our ambush. Eleanor Vance didn't bring me a case. She brought me a complete threat analysis. Isabel Thorne's strategy was already mapped on her face. The marriage was a Trojan horse for a hostile takeover. I saw it in Isabel's eyes during the toast, a premature, possessive certainty. Following their announcement, Eleanor's silence was tactical. Julian's panic bled through in a frantic email from their counsel, our first signal. Their offer was a veiled threat. Eleanor's total capitulation in exchange for burying an accounting fraud they had engineered themselves. On behalf of my client, my formal reply was a single word: no. I watched the color drain from opposing counsel's face on the video call. They thought their data was a cage. That exposure meant ruin. Isabel was confused. Her target was deviating from the psychological profile. 4 hours later, our cease and desist landed on their desk. The smug directives from that morning now seemed amateurish and premature. Julian's composure disintegrated. He messaged Eleanor directly, a pathetic appeal to a history his wife had already weaponized against her. First, he pleaded. Then he deflected, painting himself as Isabel's pawn. His frantic typing was the sound of a man digging his own grave. His attempt to claim victimhood was strategically absurd. Every desperate text was an accidental gift, a pristine exhibit for our discovery. Within the hour, his messages were filed as attempted witness tampering. His emotional spiral was now Exhibit B in the case against his wife. Then our forensic accountant, Mr. Chen, found it all, $2.4 million. He unspooled her scheme using a map I was given. Her condo, the wedding, her legal war chest, all funded by capital siphoned from our client's own company. She paid for her attack with our money. The execution of the fraud was clinically impressive. When her assistant was ordered to delete the files, she chose instead to preserve them. They saw her as invisible staff, but she testified that she had logged every incriminating directive, and her records were immaculate. She quoted Isabel's words precisely. The objective was to ensure Eleanor walks into the room bleeding out, a perfect artifact of intent. Her testimony instantly reframed a ruthless takeover as premeditated corporate sabotage. The chairman called for an immediate termination hearing. We secured emergency arbitration for 9 the next morning. No appeals. Their 48-hour timeline had been compressed into 12 hours. Reports from my investigators confirmed the atmosphere in their hotel suite. Her supreme confidence had been replaced by strategic blindness. The silence as they wiped their devices clean was no longer tactical. It was the dead air of a catastrophic, irreversible mission failure. Eleanor wasn't fighting a spurned spouse. She was methodically dismantling an opponent whose own arrogance provided the blueprint for her downfall. The arbitration room is built for clean corporate executions. They walked in flanked by lawyers, completely outmaneuvered before a word was said. Eleanor arrived last, a study in calm authority. Her eyes met Isabel's not with rage, but with the quiet finality of a checkmate. You could feel the power shift in the building. The deference they once commanded had evaporated. Their presence was now a mere irrelevance. The chairman, Mr. Albright, gave me a sharp nod. What followed was not drama, but the surgical application of securities law just as planned. I began by outlining a conspiracy to defraud. Then Mr. Chen presented the financial charts, a clinical autopsy of Isabel's entire operation. He followed the money from our vendor payments directly into her shell company. He showed them how they had paid for the coup. He proved they had used Eleanor's own money. Julian's face went crimson. I silenced Isabel's counsel with the assistant's sworn deposition. Next, I presented the forged ethics documents. The timestamps proved they were created 3 hours after their wedding photo went public. A panic move. She hadn't been securing a victory. She was frantically fabricating an alibi. Then I projected a slide from Isabel's own hard drive. The words phase shift filled the screen. It was her entire plan. I coolly narrated her strategy. Leverage the wedding, seize the chair. This was never about love. It was a corporate raid, and Julian was just the tool. He finally broke, stood up, and began to lie. He claimed she manipulated him, that he was ignorant of the finances. A pathetic, futile attempt to sever himself from his co-conspirator. I simply advanced to my final slide, a screenshot of Julian's text message detailing her strategy, sent from their honeymoon. Silence. The board members, men who barely knew the assistant's name, stared at Isabel with utter disgust. She was buried alive by her own words. The vote was immediate, unanimous. Terminated. Stock rescinded. Credentials revoked. I watched security escort her from the building for good. The board then freed up the company's entire legal budget for Eleanor's personal suits. But she had one final announcement to make. She had spent the morning calling the 3 major clients we had lost. All 3 renewed after hearing of the new audit controls she designed. The crisis Isabel created to shatter Eleanor became the very stage for her to display unshakable strength. By noon, Thorne was a ghost. Her contracts were voided. Her name was now a cautionary tale. She gambled for an empire and was left with a future of ruinous depositions. They ended up in a cheap motel. I pictured Eleanor in the boardroom, watching the sunset, alone and in total command of the world she had built. I saw her not as the tragic figure from their script, but as the quiet architect she always was. My role in it was a professional satisfaction. They sent that text message believing it was a kill shot. Instead, they handed my client the authenticated proof she needed to lock them out forever. My story is a quiet addendum to their coup. Isabel's fatal error was simple. She profiled every weakness but never considered the assistant.